Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. Hello and a very warm welcome to the Profiling Values podcast. In episode 11, the last episode, I spoke about Perspective Shift 1, why the application process must be revolutionized. And I took a deeper look into the history of employer and employee markets there. And now in episode 12, I want to look at Perspective Shift 2, so profiling values in the revolutionized application process. I want to show you the necessity for psychometric procedures on one hand, but also how profiling values basically works, its significance, who uses it, and how the process works. And maybe also bring in one or two practical examples here. In the past, as we know, hiring decisions were often based on intuition and experience. I took a strong stand on that in episode 1. Today, modern companies realize that traditional methods are no longer sufficient. Why? Well, it's just not enough what you get from the feeling and intuition on one hand, and on the other hand, it's too uncertain. And finally, with this gut feeling that an employer, a hiring decision maker, has, what does the applicant actually get out of it? So nothing really comes across at that point. And companies are also looking for scientifically sound methods for identifying talent. And I can only say from my own experience, it's always great. And last week I had someone who really had a great profiling, incredibly gifted in many areas, also internally well-positioned, but just didn't have the chance to actually go through higher education. But I was able to show him that he really has opportunities, talents, and skills to develop much further and should use them. Yes, and applicants also need clear guidelines or orientation, you could say, in a complex and changing environment. When you go to the doctor, what's the very first thing? Right, a blood test. Or you get checked diagnostically with one device or another. That's the most normal thing in the world. So why shouldn't we also introduce sensible methods in an application process that are scientifically validated and make sense? Make sense. There's really no reason not to. It's actually negligent if you don't use it. We don't go to a medieval barber surgeon today, some quack who just lays hands on us. And then says we need a bloodletting. That's just, it's absurd. We have these methods, they're scientifically validated. We can, to some extent, look behind people's foreheads, into their hands, and into their hearts to make their talents, skills, potentials, and also, their inclinations, what people really want, visible. And in that sense, we'd be absolutely crazy if we didn't do that. And there are still people, I go into companies when I'm new there, and they say, no. We decide that based on our intuition about people, we're very, very good at that. We've had very, very good experiences. Nothing against intuition, but it's not enough. So, let me introduce you a bit to the profiling values process. It's an innovative online process that, within a very short time, can identify strengths, areas for development, also skills, inclinations, and potentials in, about 20 minutes. Some are even much faster. Even so, we have great profilings in, around 10 minutes, but also just as many around 30 minutes. And when I say great profilings, I don't mean that as a judgment, but I mean it with a view always towards specific positions. There's no such thing as a bad profiling values result or a good profiling values result, but rather a suitable one and a less suitable one for specific tasks and requirements. And there isn't one single best profiling, it must be said right away. At this point, nobody operates at 100% of their potential. We all have room for improvement. And that's also a reason why the process can be used effectively in the application process, but also in personnel development, for example, with internal applications or further development. The scientific foundation is very strong by now. So, it really offers clear and objective insights into the personality structure, into the value system of a person. And the process is a bit, I'd say, not mainstream, but a bit unusual. Normally you have some kind of question, some kind of statement. I'll be a bit flippant and say, yeah, it always says there, when my boss walks into my office, I clench my fist under the table. Yes, applies completely, doesn't apply at all, applies a little bit, and so on. And then, I look. Then I put my little cross somewhere and then I get raw points on some scale, in this case probably impulsivity. And then that's added up and then there's a normative sample. There's a norm sample, and then I'm just somehow so many percentage points away from the average, either upwards or downwards. That's basically how mainstream procedures work in Germany, and also mainly in Europe. But there's definitely something more modern. And by now also very well researched. The technical term is Q-sorting. You might want to remember that. It's about actually doing sorting tasks. And in doing so, it's not so much about the norm sample, and maybe about what the average does, but it's simply about capturing a person's subjective perception and drawing conclusions from that. And the profiling values method is exactly like that. It's been further developed based on the Hartmann value profile. That means, with profiling values, the test subject actually needs to rank 4 times a total of 18 different items, meaning terms or statements, either from superpositive, so the very best for me in terms of value, or all the way down to the worst for me. So in the sense of, yes, actual value assignment, or based on the statement, fully applies to my life or doesn't apply to my life at all. And so the gradations are such that you, yes, from your gut, but of course also with reason, manage to get the sorting right for yourself. And yes, so we have this certain bridge that we're building. Between tradition and modernity, let's say. Intuition isn't switched off, but with a smart scientific analysis, a big leap forward in quality is actually possible there. Let's take a look into the profiling values method. Who uses profiling values? It's HR departments, of course, who regularly have to handle job placements. But it's also coaches, consultants, trainers who act as advisors for their clients in application and recruitment processes. The coaches are naturally more the ones who then perhaps coach candidates. But for us, it's not just about the application process. I'm focusing on that here, but it's also about personnel development, leadership development, and also team building. So, for companies, it's obviously important to find the best talent for the right positions. And in my opinion, people look outside far too quickly instead of also looking internally first. And that's why we need a different approach to make well-founded decisions and minimize uncertainty. I just explained it a moment ago. How profiling values works. When you have 18 terms and statements in front of you, and you're supposed to sort them from good to bad, then you won't be able to see through the algorithm and what it's calculating. So you can't really say, oh, I think this is socially desirable, I should put this higher and that lower. You can try, but the logic behind it is actually quite smart. Using the value mathematics of Robert S. Hartman, so that 18 value perspectives actually have their place in a logical mathematical basic position. And we then measure to what extent the linguistic representatives have this or that distance from this logical mathematical basic position, which then allows us to draw conclusions about clarity and abilities regarding certain value dimensions, scales, and competencies, and also about their inclinations, so where their attention is focused. Right. And if someone thinks, I'd like to manipulate this and then pushes this or that supposedly socially desirable thing to the very top, it might just be that they rank it too high and then they get points deducted. To put it simply, and in my opinion, it's the only method on the market that actually cannot be manipulated. With all the others, you can usually spot the social desirability if you look at it a bit smartly. Of course, given my market position, I know plenty of competitors and have carried out many procedures. And yes, I do think that Well, with all of them you can present yourself to some extent as you'd like to be seen, but that really doesn't work with profiling values. So in that sense, the method also provides answers to questions that traditional methods often leave unanswered. And you have this really paradoxical situation, break time equals 0.5s/, where applicants and participants describe themselves by doing this ranking without knowing how they're describing themselves because they don't know how the algorithm works. And that has great advantages, not just in the application process, where you can't manipulate or make yourself look great, but also in personnel and leadership development, because you get an undistorted view of yourself and can gain completely new insights. How the process works, I've already hinted at a bit. In terms of the input, the front end, it's then evaluated later in what we call a value matrix. These are two value spaces, so our outward view of people, things, structures, and systems, and our inward view of ourselves as human beings, as individuals, and of ourselves objectively. So what? From a factual standpoint, looking at our functions in society and also within ourselves. What are our objectives? What is our operating system? And where is life ultimately supposed to lead us? So we have 6 scales, which specifically on the outside, when looking at the world, are empathy, practical thinking, and structured thinking. And on the inside, when looking at ourselves, they are personal needs, success orientation, and goal orientation. And across all 6 scales, we measure both the ability, compared to society as a whole, how strong, how empathetic someone is, say 86%. And with society as the benchmark, they would be in the extremely high range, so extremely empathetic. Or practical thinking, 63%, they would still be in the high range for society, or structured thinking, 50%. Then we are in the average range, and so on. But it is not just the abilities that are measured. The clarity with which one sees these value dimensions, but also the attention one pays to them. I might have an ability that I push completely, that I use very proactively, then I have a high level of attention there. Or maybe I do not focus on it as much and might even neglect it, then I have low attention. Or I have balanced attention, and then I use it flexibly. And because we recognize not just the ability, the skill, but also the will, the inclination, and the genuine motivation to actually use it, break time equals 0.5s/, we bring a much greater depth of field and understanding to each and every scale, at every level. And this is often particularly clear with empathy. We have many people who have a really high capacity for empathy, but their willingness to empathize is often lower. And there, I believe, especially in the management sector, there is quite a bit of room for improvement. And yes, what might also be important about the process is that the evaluation, the report itself, requires explanation. There is also a summary, which is self-explanatory with standardized text modules. But it is important to us, whenever possible, that a feedback session is also provided by a trained profiling values user who can convey and explain it. So that, well, the human element is not neglected, but also so that it actually resonates and is later condensed into key takeaways, key development recommendations, and key impulses to move people forward. Because as I said, no one operates at 100% of his or her potential. And yes, I have been doing HR consulting for 25 years now. Profiling Values has existed since 2009. Profiling Values, and I've used it thousands of times, of course, and have also trained over 1,000 users by now on this procedure. And we've also done surveys with our users, of course, to see to what extent application processes and thus personnel selection, decisions for filling positions, went well, and of course will never reach 100%. We're not dealing with machines here, not with robotics, but with people. But you can simply increase the probability that a placement actually works out, really bring it into the high 90% range. And as we all know, bad hires, when it fails, are naturally quite expensive. And please always involve the applicants in that too. So I always put it this way in application processes. Well, dear candidate, if you start this job now and after 6 months you suddenly realize that it's not at all what it seemed, it doesn't suit you at all, then you'd rightly come to me, to the employer, and say, well, why didn't you look more closely? Didn't you have ways to check this more thoroughly? I gave up a good job because I thought it was a good fit. But in my opinion, you acted negligently. I couldn't do more than have the interviews here, but aren't there methods on your part to check that more precisely? And so we have many testimonials from applicants as well. And over the years I've often experienced it, even afterwards, you keep in touch, that very often, applicants are. Often really good, of course, and as a result, they have a number of offers and they decide. And very often I've received feedback that in the end, the process, the employer who used profiling values in the application process was actually the deciding factor. And that's what people chose. Why? Because they say, man, in the application process, regardless of whether it's a fit or not. An investment was made. Yeah, an investment was made, possibly in a consultant or at least in a process. I got feedback, no matter how the process turns out. I have a win-win situation. So I myself, as an applicant, get something out of it. I get feedback from another side, with an algorithm and with someone who interprets it. And the company knows about it too and can therefore respond to me in a much more targeted way. And maybe, just maybe, you might be able to either avoid making a bad hire or even get the idea to consider another position for someone, or, if it turns out to be a reasonable or good fit, you can immediately start drawing conclusions for onboarding about exactly what needs to be done so that no collateral damage occurs. So, sure, now you could of course, still ask the question, what's the difference to other methods? And the market is fragmented. And you could do a whole episode on that, a whole seminar. I want to maybe just briefly highlight at the end what are actually the USPs of profiling values. In the end, it's just a few points. Yeah, we measure values here, or we measure the process of valuing. We simulate it, and values, they're deep inside of us, and, because of that, a prediction of behavior usually goes in a more reliable direction. We can't be manipulated. I've explained that, yeah. We're quick, 15 to 20 minutes, because we also don't need any cross-checks, because it can't be manipulated. And we have this advantage that we can map the can and the want, so the skills and the focus and inclinations that you associate with these skills, and with that, also quite well. Look at the current phase of life. So, that was a presentation of our method here as part of the podcast. We touch on many topics, but it was important to me to briefly get to the point here. And we're now entering a new season, in our episodes. From 13 to 24. We'll have 6 interviews and prepare for them a bit thematically with each preceding episode. The interview partners come from our network. They're all profiling values trained users. And I'm already looking forward very much to conducting these interviews. Thanks for your time.